Super Rugby round 10, the Saturday games. A whole bunch of teams who wear blue were in action on Saturday. All relatively close games for the most part, although the Blues did end up getting kind of the game run away with on them in that one. But yeah, interesting set of results. The craziness of Super Rugby 2019 continues. There is nobody on top other than the Crusaders. Everybody else is pretty much in amongst it. We'll start with the first one. The Blues going down to Dunedin and getting beaten 24 points to 12. In what can still be considered something of a game of two halves, this one, the Blues certainly looked a lot better in the first half than they did the second. The Highlanders certainly ramped things up a notch in that second half. They were just far too good. Highlanders fans will be wondering where that team has been for much of the season, because in the second half they were legit good. In the first half they were kind of just hanging on at times, but yeah, still had the moments in the first half even then. The scoring started with Robinson getting a try from a Nonu break, made it 5-0. The Blues missed the conversion, but not long later Frizzell got his try, just kind of pounced on a bit of loose ball. Made the Highlanders lead 7 points to 5. They kicked the conversion. And that was the score at half time. It was pretty tight. The Highlanders did have a wee chance to kind of score one when Caleb Clark ended up forcing it with Highlanders guys around him. And the Blues had been under a bit of pressure. From memory, it was like a penalty. Although a lot of the ball had been down the other half. It was just when the Highlanders finally got down the Blues half, they managed to put them under a lot of pressure. But if you look at the halftime stats, you'll see what I'm talking about the Blues. The Blues had 60% of possession, 60% of territory, 279 run meters to 126. So the Blues were for the most part, kind of bossing that first half, aside from a few kind of times when they ended up back down their own end. That being said, the second half was definitely all about the Highlanders. They managed to get a penalty try through a huge scrum on the second half. It's like about 50 minutes. Yeah, 50 minutes. Made it 14 points to 5. Faddis got an intercept. Made it 21 points to 5, and this week he did have the gas to kind of follow through with that. Josh Ioane got a penalty, made it 24 points to 5, just about a quarter of an hour to go. And then the Blues got a wee consolation try just on the 80th minute through Nanai from a cross kick from, was it from Plummer? That made it 24 points to 12. They kicked the conversion, a quick little droppy, to give themselves a chance to fight for a bonus point, but they didn't end up getting it. So yeah, the Blues need to stop throwing those intercept passes. There, at least once in his 100th game, James Parsons threw the ball to a guy in a Highlanders jersey. Come on, man, learn your lesson from last week. Faddis got that intercept all too easily. There were other times as well where they just threw the ball to the Highlanders players, and you can't be doing that. It just doesn't work in Super Rugby. I must admit, Lee also kind of blew a try with the line open to Vita Lee, so the score line could have been even further out for the Highlanders in the second half. They were just too good. Like I mentioned in the first half, it was 60% possession to the Blues. It ended up being about 50-50, so the Highlanders definitely edged that area in the second half. The total tackles were 118 to 114, the Highlanders making 4 more, so very even over the course of the 80. Run meters, still the Blues edged at 480 to 371, but the Highlanders were just kept picking their key moments and able to defend. Like Coltman with those turnovers, man, was he was having a good game against those Blues. Yeah, Lee put in a pretty good try-saving tackle on Knock, I guess, which kind of makes up for the try that he blew. But yeah, if the Highlanders hadn't thrown so many forward passes and whatnot, they could have beaten the Blues by a lot more. Blues in that second half just no good. Rieko Ioane has not scored a try for a wee while now. Yeah, I think I picked the Blues for that one, which was a silly mistake, thinking that the Highlanders were kind of, on a bit of a losing streak and that might continue. Nope. They reversed that against the Blues, so regular service resumes in that department. The Highlanders now travel away to play the Sunwolves. It'll be a good chance for them to get 2 on the bounce. The Blues kind of thankfully are on the bye. A couple of losses now to New Zealand opposition. We're more used to that up in Auckland. So, not just Auckland, but yeah. Hopefully they can kind of refocus. Because there were positive signs there, but perhaps other teams are doing a bit of homework on the Blues now, because they seem to be able to read a fair bit of what the Blues are doing. And there's not much in it between the two teams. The Highlanders are on 18 points now, the Blues are on 20, so it is pretty tight. The next one, the Waratahs and the Rebels. I watched just over half of this game, and then I decided to go to bed. I decided if they kept mentioning handling errors or like a slippery ball or something, I was going to go to bed, and they mentioned it one too many times, so I headed for the sack. When I went to bed, the Rebels were still in the lead. They opened the scoring with a penalty, made it 3-0. The Tars scored. Adam Ashley Cooper got on the board. I think it's his first try since he's come back. All started from Simmons, who gets a lot of grief. He put in a nice little offload. That made it 7 points to 3, but then Meek scored 24 minutes. A bit of a loose ball. They made it 10 points to 7, so the lead was chopping and changing. Hodge got his try on, 39 minutes, and there was a bit of controversy about that one because Korobidi went up for a high ball and kind of interfered with Newsom, but the referee saw no problem with it, so a few phases later the Rebels went and scored. Hodge showed a bit of toe, and then he used his toe to kick a penalty right before halftime, so it was 20 points to 7 at halftime, and that's the score when I went to bed. It looked like the Rebels were going to kind of edge this one pretty comfortably, but who was to know they weren't going to score any points in the second half? It's generally not a wise thing to do. Most teams who don't score points in a half tend to lose, and that was the case for the Rebels because the Tars got a penalty on 48 and on 52. That made it a 7-point game. Foley got his try. There was a line out, it overthrew, and he was the first kind of guy to latch onto it and just showed a bit of gas as well. That evened the score up, and then they kicked the penalty on 62 minutes, 23-20, and that is the way it finished. The Rebels got a yellow card towards the end of the game. I guess their penalty count over the course of the season has been a wee bit on the high side, so I guess that didn't help them trying to get the win. But yeah, Waratahs with quite the comeback. Sorry I missed that. My bed was calling me, and there were quite a few knock-ons in that first half anyway. So, yeah, it's a pity that Maddox went off with an HIA. But I guess, you've got to do what you got to do in terms of keeping that head safe. Yeah. Stats of the game. The Waratahs 364 run meters to the Rebels 293. Possession and territory 50-50. Tackling percentages within 2% of each other, both in the 80s. But interestingly, that Rebels conceded 4 more penalties than the Waratahs. So perhaps that is getting a wee bit costly for them. This was a pretty big game for the Waratahs to win because the Rebels are the only team who've really threatened to pull away in that Aussie conference. Just when they started to, they toured South Africa and they got brought back down to earth. And then, back to Australia with a win, and then another one, a loss against the Stormers. So it is starting to even out now that they've had a loss to the Waratahs. The Waratahs are on 20 points. The Rebels are still first in their conference on 24, but they're within striking distance of the other Aussie teams now. And it has been a pretty good week for the Aussie teams, with the Reds getting a win, the Brumbies getting a win. The Waratahs are the only Aussie team to lose is the Rebels, and that was against another Aussie team. The Sunwolves obviously had a loss in the Australian conference as well, but yeah, a pretty good weekend for Aussie rugby, you would have to say. So does that bode well for 2019? Perhaps that's a bit too much to read into, but either way, the Waratahs host the Sharks next, so they'll be looking to keep them down because the Sharks have had a couple of bad weeks, but they seem to play better away. And the Rebels, perhaps a much needed bye for them also, like the Blues, having a couple of losses, so perhaps this does come at a good time for them to kind of refocus their efforts on what they're doing and get some guys fit, because they have been having to tinker around with the lineup a wee bit due to injuries as well. The last one, Stormers Brumbies. I didn't see this one. It was on in the middle of the night, but wow, what a crazy result. The Stormers, the team that usually performs a lot better at home and poorly away, coming back from an away win, goes home and has a loss to the Brumbies. So 19 points to 17. It is a pretty tight loss, but it is a loss for the Stormers. I've had a look at about 10 minutes of highlights. There were some pretty cool moments. Rory Arnold seemed to have a pretty massive game for the Brumbies. It was his offload that set up Samu's initial try. The conversion was well wide from Leali'ifano, but that was 5-0. Stander kicked the penalty and made it 5-3. Arnold, again, the kind of key man in this game, had a charge down and scored from that. So a bit of poor work from the Stormers there with their exit. 12 points to 3 because they did kick that conversion. Right on half-time, Pulu put a high shot in on Herschel Yankees, who was probably going to score a try. So not only did he get yellow carded, but it was a penalty try to the Stormers, so that made it 10 points to 12, no conversion required at halftime, so pretty tight. And Stormers scored a try early on in the second half, so it seemed the momentum was kind of going their way. Wilco Low got that one from about 5 meters out. That made it 17 points to 12, and that was during the yellow card period as well, so that cost the Brumbies 7 points. But then Banks got a try from Leali'ifano's long pass, and it was converted this time, so that made it 19 points to 17. And that was all the scoring. Like, that was the last scoring play just before the hour mark, so those last 20 minutes, no points to be had. The stats for this one are pretty horrendous reading if you're a Stormers fan, because the fact that you've lost despite all these numbers are pretty interesting. 477 run meters to 157. Very lopsided. Possession 66, territory 71 to the Stormers, but Brumbies 34 and 29 to play with. Interestingly, and both sides under 20 points, tackling for the Stormers 93%, tackling for the Brumbies 91%, so both exceptionally high. That's more like kind of Six Nations style rather than Super Rugby, which is usually in the low 80s or high 70s. But the tackle count, Stormers 83, Brumbies 206. Very, very effective defensive effort from them. Penalties conceded 8 to 12, so the Brumbies with a few more. I guess that makes sense given they were defending so much. The Stormers had a chance to win it with a penalty and they missed it. Both sides seemed to concede scrum penalties. Ron Nell came close, but he was in touch, so a try for him was wiped off. It was kind of Henry Spate that made that try-saving tackle. And the Stormers had another one kind of TMO'd early, so the Stormers will look back on that one as one that they could have done a lot better, and the Brumbies will look back at that as one Herculean defensive effort, so hopefully that gives them some motivation for their next game. Very, very interesting in terms of the stats and the way the game played out. Sometimes it's just about taking those chances, and that's exactly what the Brumbies did. Both those sides are now on 19 points. So, as I said, Super Rugby is pretty crazy. If you cut the Sunwolves, who are going to be cut, who are on 11 points, there's only 3 points between 14th and 8th. So nobody's out of this yet, except perhaps the Sunwolves, unless they can get some wins ASAP. So everybody is still within touching distance. Nobody seems to be able to really get away. I think the Hurricanes are on 24 points, so there's only I think 10 points between them and 14th. So apart from the Crusaders, it is pretty tight. I should say the Stormers have got the Bulls next week at home, so they will need to bounce back there, and the Brumbies travel to Argentina, South America, to play the Jaguares. So still plenty of interesting games to come. Losing bonus point for those two teams. Blues without the losing bonus point. Of course, they're the exception. But yeah, interesting weekend of rugby. You guys let me know your thoughts on the weekend's games. How did you think they went? Key players, key performers, all that kind of stuff. And I will talk to you again soon. See you later.